This is the third video in a four-part series on sailboat racing. The focus this time will be on tactics. We will start this session by discussing wind shifts. Imagine for a moment that you are in the yellow boat at the bottom of the screen and that you are trying to go around the mark at the top of the screen. The wind is steady, blowing straight down the screen. You proceed to the mark via a series of tacks. We will assume that the boat tacks in 90 degrees and that this hypothetical boat does not lose any speed at all during tacks. Because this boat doesn't lose any speed in the tacking process, it doesn't matter how many tacks are taken to reach the windward mark. The distance sailed and the time taken is the same. Now consider this case. You start out on port tack, and as you proceed, the wind starts to change direction so that you're pointing higher and higher. You congratulate yourself as you proceed, but then all of a sudden the wind changes direction and you find that you have to steer lower to keep the sails full. Realizing you're in a header, you tack. Imagine your elation as you start to get lifted again as you proceed on this tack. After a while, you again encounter a header and tack. It's your lucky day, because this process continues all the way to the weather mark. The wind direction has been oscillating, and you've been able to plan your course changes so that you are tacking in coordination with the shifts. The total distance sailed and the time taken is less than in our first example. There's a real advantage to be gained if you can plan your tacks to be in phase with the shifts. There are several types of wind shifts. Racing is often carried out in proximity to at least one shoreline and sometimes two. The local geography can produce predictable shifts. Wind can be funneled between two shorelines, it is deflected by points of land, and it often aligns itself to be perpendicular to a shoreline if it is blowing on or offshore. A persistent wind shift is one that happens based on a change in the local weather structure, the movements of fronts or air masses. There is a change in wind direction due to this weather change, and then the new direction is maintained for a prolonged period of time. Oscillating wind shifts often occur on lakes. The wind direction rotates left and right by several degrees in a repeatable cycle. The period of oscillation is usually on the order of 10 minutes or so. A gust that you see on the water as a darkening of the surface or as cat's paws is often in a different direction to the steady wind that precedes or follows it. Gusts are often associated with clouds or downdrafts. The basic strategy for handling wind shifts is simple. You want to tack on the headers and jibe in the lifts. You want to be on the inside of lifts. This means that if two boats on parallel courses arrive at a lift, you want to be the windward boat. Sometimes what appears to be a header isn't a change in the true wind direction, but a reduction in its velocity. Because a boat sails in accordance with apparent wind, a sudden reduction in true wind speed will appear as a header until the boat slows down. It is sometimes useful to consider that the course to the windward mark is actually a ladder. The rungs are very wide and they are perpendicular to the wind direction. If two boats are both on the same rung of the ladder, they are dead even with respect to their arrival at a mark to weather. In this diagram, the red boat is in a dead heat with the purple boat. In this diagram, the wind has shifted and the purple boat is now ahead. The further apart the two boats are on the rung, the more pronounced the effect. One of the first decisions to be made in a race is choosing which end of the line to start at. Many racers start at the end of the line that appears to be closest to the weather mark, but that only works if the mark can be laid without tacking, not a common situation. In this diagram, the purple boat has chosen the committee boat end of the line, because it appears to be closest to the weather mark at the top of the screen. However, this slide adds the rungs to a ladder. They are perpendicular to the wind direction. it can be seen that the yellow boat has actually made a better choice of starting position because it is on a higher rung of the ladder than the purple boat. We will now look at a number of other factors that are related to the tactics to be used in sailboat racing. Before the start, it is good to decide which side of the course looks more favored. Look for visual clues. If you can see the weather mark, note which way its pennant is flying. Look at the direction and intensity of smoke and flags that are located on shore. Look at any anchored boats in the area. Which side of the course is likely to have more wind, and where will the most favorable wind direction be? You need to decide which end of the line to start on, based on its orientation relative to the wind direction. Is the direction likely to change by the time of the starting signal? The most important goals in starting are to be going fast, in clear air, on time, and at the right end of the line. It is sometimes tempting to do a port tack start. This is usually because of a misalignment of the line with respect to the wind, such that the left end of the line is highly favored. This is best attempted when the line is long, the fleet is small, or you know that the other competitors will not be overly aggressive. If you can do this successfully right at the pin, it means that you will already be in clear air on the favored tack when the horn sounds. The only problem is that wall of starboard tackers who will be arriving on the scene just as you approach the line. If you can't get through, do not tack underneath the starboard tackers, but ease sheets and bear off, looking for a hole. Even if you have to take a few sterns, you'll still be in better shape. On shorter courses, it is important not to get boxed in right after the start. You may have made a great start on starboard tack, but you're going to have to tack over sooner or later, and the presence of starboard boats on your right hip can prevent you from doing so. Those pesky starboard tackers might take you all the way to the ley line, or even beyond. Ideally, you can time your tack so that you are in phase with the wind oscillations. Given a choice, always choose to be on the tack that results in the highest velocity vector in the direction of the next mark. Don't tack too often because there is a significant loss of momentum every time you do so. Avoid getting on the ley line to the next mark too soon. The wind is never completely steady, and it could shift in such a way that you can either no longer lay the mark or perhaps overstand it. As you approach the weather mark, you must be aware of the other boats that are also heading toward it, and anticipate what they are likely to do. Be sure you know who will have right of way or will be entitled to room at the mark. Going downwind, decide if you want to just head straight to the leeward mark, or if wind and traffic make it best to use a series of jibes. Timing of the final downwind jibe is important. You don't want to make the final jibe too early and end up on a slow, dead downwind course as you approach the mark. Because of this, many skippers will wait too long to do the jibe. They then discover that their new course is much closer to the wind than they had anticipated. This is because the skipper was watching the masthead fly, which is indicating apparent wind as opposed to the true wind. As you approach the leeward mark, come in wide, but as you trim hard on the wind, plan on passing close by the mark. Assuming you have finally got ahead of your archenemy, you don't want him to suddenly get a favorable wind shift and pass you. You want to stay in the same general area and between the competition and the next mark. Hopefully, you can also get into a position where the dirty air from your sails is affecting his performance. On the other hand, if you're trailing someone while going to weather, it makes no sense to follow along behind. Tack away and hopefully find some favorable wind before he does. If you're going to weather on port tack, you'll often encounter starboard tack boats that appear to be on a collision course with you. Unless you plan on tacking into a safe leeward bow position, you need to know if you can make it across his bow safely or if you will have to duck. If there's a shoreline on the far side of him, look at the trees beyond his bow. Are they disappearing behind his bow at a rate commensurate with your boat speed? If so, you will probably not be able to get across in front. However, if more and more trees are becoming visible, there's a good chance that you might be able to get across. Don't forget that even though you might make it, you need to remember that the rest of your boat that is behind you also needs to clear. If the final leg to the finish line is to windward, you need to decide which end of the line to head for. It is usually the opposite end of the line that you started at. Well, that's the end of this video. There's one more in the series and it covers rules.